I would like to introduce you to your first speaker for today. He is the Director of Content and Media with RYPPLE, Mr. Nick Stein. Mr. Stein, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Gerald, and welcome everyone to Mastering the Science of Persuasion, the new webinar in RYPPLE's leadership series. We're really excited today to have a guest with us who is one of the most influential C-suite advisors on the planet, Shirzad Chamine. Shirzad's new book, Positive Intelligence, which hit both the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller lists, is an incredibly practical and useful guide to training our minds to achieve our full potential. And he's got a fantastic presentation prepared today for you on how we can learn to become more persuasive, whether we're in sales or other parts of the organization. Before I introduce Shirzad and turn things over to him, I just wanted to talk for a moment about why we're here and what Salesforce RYPPLE is all about. We started RYPPLE because we believe that the way we work today is very different. You've seen we're more global and social today than ever before. We come together in more fluid teams. We're more mobile, and we're definitely a lot more results-oriented and focused on the bottom line. In addition to that, people today have very different expectations about work. They're not just there from 9 to 5. They want a lot more. Work has become a much bigger part of their identity. And when you look at some of these statistics up there on the screen about the importance of people feeling more aligned and connected to what they do, getting recognized when they do great work, hearing from their managers on a regular basis. Pick up any management book, and this is what you will see over and over again in terms of how do you get the most out of the people that work for you if you're a manager, and if you're an individual contributor, how is it that you can advance your own career and become more successful? The problem that we face today and sort of where RYPPLE got its start was that the traditional tools out there that could help you achieve and accomplish these things aren't really designed for you at all. They're designed for this department in your company called HR that for the vast majority of us really has very little to do with our day-to-day lives at work. So when it comes to getting people aligned around a common goal or objective, hitting next month's sales target or putting out that next great marketing campaign, giving people the feedback and coaching they need to become more successful, and giving people recognition when they do a great job, which science tells us is really important to motivating and keeping people engaged. These are not things that HR systems do. And so that's why we designed RYPPLE, to kind of take those practices, those crucial tools and behaviors out of the hands of HR professionals and put them in the hands of managers and individuals. So as a manager, you can provide your people with the feedback and coaching and recognition they need to be successful and to drive the business forward. And as an individual, you can have control over building the skills and reputation for yourself as you move forward in your career. Now, the reason that we started this leadership series is that we were looking for like-minded individuals who saw the world of work, the way things are changing today in the same way we did. And that brings me to today's guest. Shirzad Chamine is the chairman of CTI, which is the largest coach training organization in the world. He's also a preeminent C-suite advisor and has coached hundreds of CEOs and their executive teams. He's got a lot of fancy letters after his name, including a PhD in neuroscience, as well as degrees in psychology, electrical engineering, and business at Stanford, where he lectures today. And in his new book, Positive Intelligence, Shirzad takes seminal ideas from psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and neuroscience, and brings them together into a very practical guide that you can use to further your own career. He's a very highly sought-after speaker and lecturer, and we're excited to have him with us today. So without further ado, let me turn things over to you, Shirzad.
Thank you, Nick, for that introduction, and thank you, Ripple, for giving me the chance to communicate to your audience. I understand that even though I can't disclose the number, we have a record-breaking enrollment for this session, which is very exciting. My presentation is going to be based on my book, Positive Intelligence, and the subtitle of the book is Why Only 20% of Teens and Individuals Achieve Their True Potential. So I already had a webinar as part of the series which introduced positive intelligence and its general application to helping people reach their true potential. And I was asked to do another session, which is today's session, to focus positive intelligence and its tools and research to just the question of selling and persuasion. So today is about mastering the science of persuasion and selling. And for those who attended my last session, I want to say that some of the slides may appear similar, but the way I will talk about those slides are going to be quite different, and I'm going to connect all the dots between the content of that slide to specific application to selling and persuading. I also understand that on today's session we have people who are actual salespeople and people who are leaders of salespeople, and also we have just the managers and leaders from all across different industries and different functions. So please know that when I use the word selling, what I mean by that is either selling as a function of being a salesperson, or selling, persuading, or motivating in any other type of context. For example, if you're trying to convince an employee to do something, you're trying to sell a concept to them and motivate them. If you're trying to convince a colleague to work on your project rather than somebody else, you're doing selling. If you're trying to attract a new employee, you're doing some kind of selling. And if you're even talking to your spouse to help leave you alone and let you be who you are rather than trying to change you all the time, that's a kind of selling and persuading. When you're trying to convince your teenage daughter to take better care of her own physical safety after a party in terms of driving home with people who are not drunk in the car or whatever, that's a form of selling and persuading. So I'm going to keep using the word selling. Please replace that word with selling or persuasion. That's appropriate to your own context. We have a lot of content today, so I'm going to be relatively high-paced in my presentation. Initially, I will go through an overview of positive intelligence and PQ, which is the general framework that I use in my book, and then show you research link that connects the concept of PQ with selling performance and performance in all areas of business. PQ, by the way, stands for Positive Intelligence Quotient. So just like IQ is your cognitive intelligence, EQ is your emotional intelligence, PQ stands for your positive intelligence. Then I'll show you 3 strategies to increase your PQ and dramatically boost your ability to sell or persuade. And I'll show you the 3 principles of selling that are the PQ principles, and suggested next steps for taking these concepts and tools and putting them to action. My focus and bias is on application of things. I'm not interested in theories that sound good, but then you don't know how to use it tomorrow. So you will notice that a lot of what I talk about is highly practical and very tools-based as part of the heritage of coaching CEOs and executive teams. I've learned to make things very concrete so that they know exactly how to use it the next day. So first, let's start with the definition of positive intelligence. Positive intelligence, the way I've defined it, is the percentage of time that your mind is serving you as opposed to sabotaging you. Clearly, I'm instantly introducing the concept that each of us in our mind are spending some percentage of time sabotaging ourselves. and that your mind is your best friend, but it is also your worst enemy. And I hope that does not come as a surprise to you, that your mind is your own worst enemy. And your positive intelligence is higher if the percentage of time that your mind is serving you is increased, and it will have dramatic effects on both your performance and your personal satisfaction in life. And that's one of the things that I want to show you today, specifically related to selling. In terms of the way that serving you versus sabotaging you happens in your mind, one of the helpful tools that I'm introducing is the concept of saboteurs, which are the agents of sabotaging you in your own mind, versus the sage, which is the character in your mind that does serve you and is your best friend rather than your worst enemy. The saboteurs have names like the judge, controller, victim, stickler, avoider. There are 10 of them altogether, and every single human being I have ever known, including myself, suffers from a couple of these saboteurs. Everybody has a judge, and then depending on your personality, you have the control, victim, stickler, one of the other 9. And we obviously want to weaken your saboteurs, and we want to strengthen the sage. A saboteur, by the way, this is just a framework to introduce a way that your mind is habitually thinking and feeling and interpreting life. So obviously these characters aren't running around in your head. They are metaphors that help us put definition to the way your brain has gotten used to interpreting things and reacting to things, and they help us understand those patterns very quickly because of this framework. One of the key things that I want to show you early on is a huge body of research that I'm tapping into, some of it my own, some of it relying on other researchers who have looked at the positive to negative ratio and translating those to the PQ scores. So these are examples of what happens when your positive intelligence, your PQ, is increased. If you're in sales as salespeople, on average, you will be selling 37% more. You have shifted to higher PQ. When the leader of a team has shifted to higher PQ, their teams perform 31% better. If you're a doctor and your brain has shifted to higher PQ area, you are 19% faster in making accurate medical diagnosis. You are 3 times more creative as individuals and teams when the PQ has gone up. And very important to me, and I hope very important to you, you'll be far happier and more peaceful as an individual. What will increase your PQ are things in the brain that directly impact your level of happiness and peace of mind. So that, too, is a very, very important byproduct of increasing your PQ. And for some people, it's not the byproduct, it's the key product. But here we are talking about performance, so we are going to mostly focus on the impact on performance rather than on happiness. One of the key things, I'm right now overviewing the key principles before going into more detail about selling and persuasion connection of these principles. But one of the key things here is that I would love for you to know that you really literally are of 2 brains and 2 minds. You literally have different brain regions that are wired completely different from each other, and they have very different functions. What I call the survival brain is the brainstem, limbic system, and portions of your left brain. And that part of your brain really is focused on making sure you physically and emotionally survive long enough through the evolutionary mechanism so that you can spread your genes to the next generation. And that because that is so evolutionarily based, it is the dominant part of most individuals, and sometimes by far the most dominant part of most individuals. Most people are primarily spending their time in the survival brain, as opposed to the PQ brain, which is a very different region of the brain, and you can read what the regions are for yourself. And the consequences are that the focus on the survival brain obviously is on survival, but the focus of PQ brain is on thriving. The voice of the survival brain is through the saboteurs. The voice of the PQ brain is the sage. And very importantly, the impact on emotions is very, very direct. The survival brain generates emotions of anger, anxiety, disappointment, shame, etc. The PQ brain region is wired to generate very different feelings like curiosity, compassion, joy, creativity, peace. A very important thing I would love for you guys to take away is that actually if you don't learn to activate your PQ brain, you can be in paradise, and if your survival brain is running, you're still going to be finding faults with things. You're still going to be anxious. You're sitting on a beach and sipping on champagne, and you're still going to be angry about the fact that your champagne was served 1 minute later than your neighbor was served. So long as your survival brain is in charge, it doesn't matter what your circumstances are, you're going to be running unhappy and running those kinds of feelings. And the opposite is true. If you're in your PQ brain, you're going to be feeling those great feelings regardless of the circumstances of your life. And all of this has a lot of impact and consequence on your ability to sell, as we will very quickly get into. There are 3 strategies to increasing your PQ. Clearly, you want to be able to weaken your saboteurs on the one hand, the bad guy or gal in your head. Second strategy is strengthening your sage, the good guy or gal in your head. And third is just building your PQ brain muscles. And now we are going to get into the specific application to sales, because as you look at these saboteurs, I'm going to show you how each of them begins to impact your ability to sell and persuade. These are the 10 saboteurs. The judge is in a darker coloration because the judge is the master saboteur. Every single person has the judge character. And the reason for it is that the judge has this negative bias to focus on what's wrong and to focus on danger and to focus on what's missing. This negative bias was actually very helpful for our survival. If you were in the jungle and the trees were starting to shake, if you assume the worst and assume that it's a tiger coming up to eat you, you would have run and saved yourself eventually from some real danger. But if you were feeling peaceful and not running worried and not negatively interpreting situations, sooner or later there would have been an actual tiger would have eaten you alive. You never got to pass your genes. So the negative bias of the judge is a universal tendency that has been passed on through evolution. But the other saboteurs are not universal. Depending on who you are, you would have one of them, and there's an assessment online that I'll tell you about where you can figure out which one is your top saboteur. I want to start with the judge and its huge consequence on your ability to sell. The judge is constantly finding fault with you, with others, and with events and circumstances. It's the source of most of your unhappiness, anxiety, self-doubt, anger, those kinds of things. It also triggers your other saboteurs. So to start off, it's very clear that a sense of confidence in yourself and the ability to be your own best friend versus worst enemy and not beating yourself down all the time is something that's going to impact the mood you're in, the energy that you exude, and it's very quickly going to impact the kind of success that you'll have in selling and persuading. I want to use an example here right now. I want to share with you the fact that what I've seen a lot of people who are trying to sell and persuade others, they tend to put them on the pedestal. If you're selling to somebody of a high function in an organization, we tend to project an aura of perfection on them and an aura of superiority to them that does end up having us feel a little insecure and feel a little concerned about our impact and the impression we are making and all of those things. And a very powerful thing that I'd love for you guys to understand is that no matter what people's position and level of power in an organization are, my experience is that they're actually privately busy torturing themselves with a very strong judge, which is not obvious to the world, and if you're not careful, you don't think it's really happening. But really, I want you to know that it is happening. And as proof for you, what I want to share is some expressions that some CEOs made. I ran a seminar with 100 plus CEOs, and I asked them to confidentially put on 3x5 cards without their names attached how is it that they are torturing themselves? What is the voice in their head saying to them? And the reason I want to read this to you is that if I am a salesperson and if I'm selling to a vice president or something or C-suite somewhere, it would be much more intimidating to me if I think I put them on a pedestal and think they're all perfect, versus if I know that they're actually having a very different private experience. So here's their private experience. I'm just going to be reading out loud some of these 3x5 cards that these guys wrote. These are verbatim what they wrote. I'm over my head in the complexity of my company and economy. And this is a person, these are all people who are extremely successful CEOs and highly respected. I'm afraid I will die one day without having had any impact on my world. I'm terrified of being alone in my life. I have a drug and alcohol issue. I get uncomfortable in social gatherings. No one would know, but I have to push myself to show up. I used to get sick before events. I often don't like the person I am at work. I'm feeling very sad and lonely, and the antidepressants I'm on don't seem to be helping. I struggle with feelings that I'm not worthy. I worry my leadership skills don't measure up, and I'm holding back the potential of my company. I don't love myself very much. I have been abusing drugs and alcohol to deal with stress. I'm afraid that whatever I'm doing matters to no one. I fear dying at an early age from overwork and stress. My financial situation is not what I would have others believe. I'm fearful that I'm not smart enough or courageous enough to make the next investment or direction for my company. I wish I could run away for 1 year, just be alone. I'm terrified of failing as the leader of my business. I don't believe I know who I am as a person. I feel as if I'm shallow and lack emotion. I'm afraid of ending up like my father, who is unloved and will die alone. So this is really privately what's going on in people's heads. You're sitting across them from the table, and you're responding to a public persona of togetherness and happiness. And I want you to know that most human beings I have worked with, this is what's really going on underneath. The reason I'm sharing this with you is that I know most of you on this call are having some of these feelings yourselves. And one of the things that I want to say is that that is the voice of the judge inside of yourself. And that is, so first of all, please feel that a lot more normal about the fact that you're having that voice. It's not you who is privately torturing yourself. Actually, that's a human condition. And if you notice about the people you're trying to sell to or persuade, you will be less intimidated by who they think they are and more in touch with the fact that they're just another human being like yourself, and it allows you to touch them at a more real level. So that's just the judge. And let's now get into more of the saboteurs and connect with how they impact their ability to sell and persuade. So first and foremost, the question of one of the saboteurs top on the list is victim. You're going to run across this a lot. If you are somebody who is suffering from the victim saboteur, then when you are in sales, what you're going to experience often is that anything that goes wrong, you will take those feelings and go into a place of almost depression or or licking your wounds for way too long. That shifts your energy to a place where it's not very conducive to sales. So victim can really damage your ability to shift your energy back to positivity so that you can be more effective. If your client or the person you're trying to sell to has the victim, then the thing you want to work on is how do you have that person get enough attention about their feelings, because victim ultimately wants empathy and attention from others, but not be so sucked into that energy that then you're not able to shift them and yourself to a place where effective selling can happen. So that's the impact and the attention you want to put on the victim saboteur. If you are a pleaser, and if that's one, by that I mean if you have the pleaser saboteur, the problem with that in sales is that it will have you do things that may not necessarily help the cause of selling and persuading, but things that will have people like you more, because the pleaser is very much trying to gain acceptance. So you may gain acceptance and people will think you're a nice guy or a nice gal, but you will not get the sale because you're too focused on that element. If you're trying to sell to a pleaser, then the problem is that the pleaser will give you all sorts of misleading signals. They will appear to be flattering you and being nice to you and all sorts of things. And if you don't know if that is their pleaser saboteur that's doing that, then you will wrongly read those signals as a signal that you're doing well in the selling process. And at the end, you get very surprised by why the sale isn't made, because actually you were reading all the wrong signals. So you want to be aware of which of your prospective clients or people you're trying to persuade actually is coming from a pleaser saboteur perspective. The avoider is a lot into procrastinating or avoiding difficult tasks or conflicts. If you have the avoider going, you will procrastinate on elements of sales that are not very pleasing, such as making the cold call or doing some of the administrative stuff that's not as pleasing to you, but things that are important to do. And the question is, how do you shift away from being the avoider? If you have the avoider with your prospective client, the problem is that they will not tell you the unpleasant stuff. They will shy away from telling you the truth about areas of conflict. So again, they will waste your time for a long period without you knowing what's really going on, because they have been avoiding the real elephant in the room. So it would be helpful for you to know how to shift that in your client. The stickler, a need for perfection, when a salesperson has that, the problem is that especially when stress is high, the saboteurs become hyperactivated. So if you have a stickler, a need for perfection all the time, then you're going to waste inordinate amount of time making little things perfect in your self-presentation or process, which are actually not going to make a big difference. But because that brings you a sense of comfort and lowers your anxiety, you'll be wasting your time on perfectionism when it's actually not going to serve the selling process. If your prospect is into stickler modality, the problem is that they will be focusing and dragging you to a place of focusing on perfectionism in areas that don't really matter as much to the overall success of the project. So you may want to manage that, understand that that's going on, and manage that so that you don't take both of you to a place that's going to be wasteful. The restless has a tendency to have you get focused and have you pursue the next shiny object, pursue the next interesting and exciting thing, and drop the last thing you were doing because it's at a point where it's not as exciting or shiny anymore. So that's going to very much detract you from following through with your process to the end. If your prospect has that, then the problem is that they are not going to be focused on the sales process to the end. They can go down on all sorts of tangents and branches and take you down with them. So you want to learn to manage that. Controller is very destructive. So actually all of these saboteurs are very destructive. If you try to, the selling process needs to be a fluid process because another person or another team is involved. And if you try to control it too much, it really has the prospective person be feeling tightly restricted, and they will rebel against it, or even your own team members. So you need to manage your own need for control and learn to be more fluid in situations you can't control. It very much impacts the energy in a selling context. And if your prospect has a strong controller, what you want to give them is something they can control so that they can satisfy their need for control, so that then they are not going to be controlling the overall process too much. So the strategy with the controller is you've got to give them something to control so that they can let go of controlling the overall thing. And it takes some understanding of the saboteur to be able to do that. Hyperachiever is the saboteur that has you be constantly seeking self-acceptance and self-love through performing and performing and performing. For a little while, it might get you some successes, but it's a recipe for workaholism and burnout. And it's also a recipe for never, ever feeling that you're good enough because you're only as good as your last performance. And that has quite an impact on your sense of confidence. And if your prospect has that saboteur, then they also, again, they are going to be having a loss of perspective in terms of what really matters to get to their goal. And sometimes they're going to be sacrificing people around them to get to the goal. So you want to be able to be careful about that and manage that process so that there aren't casualties on the side of the road by the end of the selling process. The hyper-rational is one of the most destructive saboteurs to both the seller and the buyer, both you trying to persuade and the person trying to be persuaded. If you have the hyper-rational, you think that everything is going to be based on the rational and logical and data stuff. And that's clearly not how sales happen. Sales is not nearly as data-driven and rational a process as you would want it to be. And so you will miss out on the most important part of sales, which is on emotion and relationship. And if your client is in the hyper-rational mode, you may make the mistake of thinking that they don't have emotions because they seem so rational. But actually, hyper-rational people have a lot of emotions, can be very sensitive. And if you ignore the fact that this client actually is a very emotional person but doesn't show it, then you're not going to be dealing with some of the underlying currents that ultimately impacts whether sales happens or not. So that's a very important saboteur to pay attention to, both yourself and the other. And finally, the hypervigilance is one that's never resting, sees dangers everywhere. If you have this, you're always running exhausted emotionally, wasting so much of your time and effort fighting the non-existent dangers. And if your client has that, you've got to be able to manage that. Otherwise, it's going to waste so much of the selling process on trying to have contingencies for all sorts of things that really, at the end of the day, don't matter. This is a very, very quick review. I apologize for such a speed. There's a lot of content here. My book goes into a lot more detail about these things. But I want you to see that each of these saboteurs has quite an impact on you and your prospect that you're trying to sell or persuade. This was at least the taste and the flavor of that. Right now, what I'd like to do is just ask the question, what do you think? We're going to do a quick poll. First option is, I do have saboteurs that cause significant harm to my effectiveness in selling and persuading. So go ahead and respond to this question. The second option is, I don't have saboteurs that cause significant harm to my effectiveness in selling and persuading. And the third is, I don't know yet. This is a confidential survey. This is absolutely confidential. We do not keep records on who said what. So please just say what it is that's on your mind and what it is that's true for you. We're going to take another 30 seconds or so, and then we're going to close the poll, and we're going to show the results to see what is the interpretation that people have on this poll. I'm going to give another 10 seconds or so. If you haven't responded, please go ahead and respond. It is completely confidential. We will not keep the records. And we are going to go ahead and close the poll. It's going to take about 20 seconds or so for us to see the results. And I'm always curious, different populations that have done this poll, I will tell you what those other populations' results have been. So first, let's see what the result of this population is, and then I'll hope you can compare and contrast it with the other groups that I have done this with. So 79%, around 80% say I do have the saboteurs that do significant harm. Only 4% say I don't know, and 4% say I don't have these saboteurs, 16% say I don't know. And the remarkable thing is that 4%, the 4% saying I don't have it, is almost identical to the group at Stanford University where I do this work. And even the last webinar we did with RYPPLE, very different audience, had the same exact 4%. And it might be that you don't have the saboteurs. It might be that they're so well hidden you don't see them. If you don't have them, it's not because you never had them. You may have done some work on them. If you haven't done work on your saboteurs, chances are that they're hiding and you're just not seeing them. But one of the good news here is that most of you are aware that you have them, because it would actually be more dangerous if you have saboteurs and don't even know that you have them. So let's move on, and for me to show you very quickly a way to weaken your saboteur, different strategies, but the way to weaken your saboteurs is you identify your top two saboteurs and you debunk their self-justifying lies, because each of them lie to you to try to convince you that they're your friend, not your enemy. Then you notice their typical pattern of thoughts, feelings, sensations so that they can't hide anymore. So that then when you catch them in action, when they show up in your head, when the judge is telling you, whispering something in your head, or the controller is whispering something in your head, the practice is just label that moment, label that thought as, oh, that's the judge saboteur again. And, there goes the controller again. You just label it and let it go. You don't fight it. You don't argue with it. And then for 10 seconds, after you notice and label the thought, you just simply bring your attention to your physical sensations, any of your physical sensations for about 10 seconds. I call that a PQ rep, and the reason we do that is it literally shifts your brain from the survival brain region to your PQ brain region. Bring your attention right now, for example, right now as you're sitting on your seat. If you begin, say, to notice anything about your body, for example, just notice the weight of your body on your seat, the weight of your body on your seat. Or notice the weight of your feet on the floor. Or notice the weight of your hands wherever they're resting. Or notice your breathing. Notice the next few breaths rising and falling of your chest or stomach. Any of these will begin to shift your brain from the survival brain to the PQ brain region, and that's going to impact how strong the voices of the saboteurs are versus the voice of the sage. And of course, I'll show you later that you need to do several of these reps to really build up the muscles of that part of your brain. So that's one of the ways to combat your saboteurs. Again, you can do the assessment online. I'll show you where to go for that later. Strategy number 2 for increasing your positive intelligence and having all those impacts in your life and in your book in Sell and Persuade is to strengthen your sage. And there are 5 powers that the sage has, and these are the powers to explore, to empathize, to innovate, to navigate, and to activate. And what I show in the book is that absolutely every challenge in life and business, including every challenge in sales and persuasion, can be met by these 5 powers of the sage. And that's all you need to access. And if you are using those 5 powers, then you will be feeling all sorts of great feelings and being more successful. You don't have to resort to any of your saboteurs to get the challenge met. And for each of the power games, for each of the powers, there's a power game that I'll just give you a flavor of, but these power games are there to help you access that power in your own brain a little bit more quickly. But first and foremost, before you even focus on the 5 powers of the sage, you want to focus and shift to the sage perspective. The sage perspective is that absolutely every outcome or circumstance is a gift and opportunity. Every outcome or circumstance is a gift and opportunity. That includes the fact that you just got rejected in your sales call. That includes the fact that you just lost your biggest client. That includes the fact that your presentation went really badly. It includes the fact that you just made a huge unforced errors. So what we'll show is that absolutely everything, including your mistakes and including your failures, can and shall be turned into a gift and opportunity by shifting to the sage powers rather than allowing the judge to come and beat you up over your mistake and shame or guilt you about it, or have you try to avoid it because it's so painful. So shifting to the sage perspective, first and foremost, is very critical. We don't have the time to go into the stallion story, but it's a story that kind of brings to life why and how is it that you can live this perspective and that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if you do. I'd like to just give you a tiny bit of exposure to each of the 5 powers. The power to explore, being curious, being in beginner's mind, figuring out how to discover more, how to be fascinated with what's going on. One of the ways that this power can be very helpful is in figuring out what to do with your mistakes. Often when you're in the saboteur mode and you have just made a mistake or you have just been rejected, you have failed in sales, the problem is that your judge will come and make it such a painful event that you will actually be unwilling to look at what really happened and learn from it. And typically people think they're looking at the situation and learning from their mistakes, but really because it's so painful due to the saboteur interference, we tend not to dwell too much on how the mistake happened, and we very quickly try to move on. If you're in exploration mode, if you're absolutely fascinated in the discovery mode of what happened here, how did I screw up? How did I make that mistake? Why did I make that mistake for the fifth time? What is having me make that mistake over and over again? What went wrong there? If you go into it with a fascinated energy of explorer, from the perspective of the sage that says, I shall turn this mistake into a gift and opportunity, then you will really very quickly get to the bottom of the patterns you have in selling and persuading that constantly get you in trouble. Then you can really quickly go from them and make sure that you take one mistake into a huge opportunity of, if you lost this sale, you'll win the next 10 because you really learned the key thing about it. But it's not going to happen automatically unless you really go into the deep power of the sage for explore. The power game we use here is fascinating anthropologist. An anthropologist trying to understand what's going on is not judging the situation, is just fascinated with the situation. Can you be a fascinated anthropologist as you try to look at what's happening with you and with your prospective client, rather than be in judgment and in control mode, which is what the saboteurs try to do. Another power, empathize. In sales and persuasion, one of the most difficult things is rejection. And if you're not empathic with yourself, you're going to take a negative situation and make it even worse for yourself. You're always going to be going drained, emotionally drained, because you're constantly beating yourself up. You need to empathize with yourself. You need to be more compassionate and loving towards yourself. The judge tells you got to keep beating yourself up for those mistakes so you don't repeat them. The truth is the opposite. You need to have empathy and appreciation and compassion for the fact that you're an imperfect human being. You're a flawed human being. Everybody is that. You will live and die as an imperfect human being. You shall make a ton of mistakes. You will absolutely make a ton of mistakes. When you make them, please be compassionate with yourself. Beating yourself up is counterproductive. It's the lie of the judge that says you should beat yourself up. The other thing to be empathizing with is your client or prospective client. If you don't like your prospective client, if there's something about them that irritates you, it's going to really impact your ability to sell to them. So one of the power games I use is visualize the child. In the back of your mind, can you visualize the person that tends to irritate you? Can you visualize them as a 5-year-old that they were, with the big eyes and with the wonder in their eyes and running around and finding shells on a beach? If you visualize anybody as a 5-year-old or 6-year-old, you're going to feel love and compassion for them. You're going to feel empathy for them, and that's going to help you connect to them at a deeper level, and it's going to impact your ability to sell to them or persuade them, because they will sense that you're appreciating them rather than judging them. Innovate is about thinking out of the box. There's a power game there, yes, and typically when we think we are brainstorming, we are not really brainstorming, because the judge is constantly coming in and saying, no, that's not a good idea. No, that's not going to work. And it very prematurely limits our ability to really think out of the box. So I show how for true innovation by yourself or with your prospective client, you need to go into a process I call the yes and, where absolutely every idea is appreciated and built on and built on and built on and built on, until after 99 ideas that don't work, the 100 is going to work. But each of those 99 ideas were appreciated for something as they were happening, so that you'll eventually get to something powerful. And that's not going to happen with the judge interference, constantly judging the ideas. So with yourself or with your prospective client, you can go to a much better problem-solving situation if you do the SAGE modality of innovation. In navigation, the key point I want to make, the navigate power, is about being clear about your purpose and values, what brings meaning to work and life, and also connecting your prospective client or the person you're trying to persuade in your team to connect the dots on what it is that's on the table to what it is that brings deep meaning and purpose and value. And one of the key things I say to beginner salespeople is that they just ask a question, so what's your vision here? And within a couple of minutes of having the answer, they move on to the tactics and to the solution. And actually, that the mistake there is thinking that by somebody verbalizing their vision, they are in touch with that vision. But you need to take that idea from something in their head to something in their heart. You need to spend a lot more time on bringing an idea alive in somebody's heart, not in their head, so that the fire lights up in their heart. Once people get connected to their sense of deeper value and meaning, they will go to the end of the world with you, and every obstacle will be removed automatically because you have helped them connect to the deeper emotional reservoir in their heart. So your job number one in selling and persuading is have people catch fire, connect the dots between what you're trying to sell to them and a deeper sense of value, purpose, meaning for them. At that point, no obstacle will matter anymore. And most people don't spend enough time on making sure the fire catches initially before moving on. Activating is the final step, and the power game here is preempt the saboteurs before you take action. Anticipate what the saboteurs are going to come in and try to do so that as they come in, you know how to respond to them. And again, in the book, there's a lot more description of how to make that happen with you and your prospective clients. The final strategy for increasing your positive intelligence is to make sure that you do 100 PQ reps a day. These are very simple things to do. If you do it within 21 days, you're going to have built brain muscles in your PQ brain. That makes these things you're talking about a lot more automatic and a lot simpler to do. In the book, I'll show you tons of different ways where you can do this while you're eating, while you're driving, while you're sitting in a meeting. You don't need to take extra time to do this. It will build up that critical brain muscle. The final concept that I want to cover in our remaining time is the concept of PQ channel versus data channel. In every human communication between two people, including with you and the person you're trying to sell or persuade, there are facts, data, and details on the data channel, but on the invisible PQ channel, there's energy being exchanged, there's emotion being exchanged, there's a tonality and a context. And the premise here is that actually there's the three principles of selling, the PQ principles. The first PQ principle is that actually the PQ channel is far more important to selling than the data channel. Even with the most analytical, data-driven kind of prospective client, they think that data is important. You think that data is important. But ultimately, sale really happens at the PQ channel, far more than on the data channel. Don't fall in the trap of going deeper and deeper and deeper into the data and analysis. That's not where the sale happens. The buyer is more likely to say yes to what it is that you're suggesting if her PQ brain is activated, if his or her PQ brain is activated. Just because the PQ brain is wired to say yes to new possibilities, the survival brain is wired for status quo, for danger awareness, for saying no to new things, because new things are dangerous to survival. And so you need the buyer to have shifted to the PQ brain for them to be much more likely to say yes to what it is you want to be selling to them. And the third principle is you need to shift yourself to the PQ brain to help the buyer to shift to the PQ brain. The reason for this is the brain has this thing called the mirror neurons, and people's brains unconsciously and automatically mimic the brain in front of them. So if you have shifted the brain frequency of yourself by going to the PQ brain, your prospective client is going to automatically begin to shift to that part of the brain where they're wired to say yes rather than wired to say no. These obviously I can spend just a whole day going into more depth and detail about how to put that to action. The book goes into case studies about how to do that. And so this is a synopsis of the whole thing, that your IQ will get you so far in selling and persuading or other areas of management and leadership. Your EQ, emotional intelligence, will take you further. And what I'm showing here is that PQ is one that will get you to 100% of your potential for performance and fulfillment. It's the final leg if you want to travel. The book is Positive Intelligence. The website is positiveintelligence.com. There you can find a 2-minute PQ score assessment, a 5-minute saboteur assessment to figure out what your saboteurs are so you can weaken them. You can find other tools and resources and book excerpts. There's my email and Twitter. I hope you have found this of value. And I'm going to go to Nick now and ask him to, for our remaining time, to try to tell me what are some of the questions so that I can help address them.
Well, thank you, Shirzad. That was a very insightful and valuable presentation. If you could, I think you still have the ball, so if you could just advance the slide. We are going to get some questions in a minute. People have been writing in some questions, and for those of you still on who have questions you want to ask, now's the time to quickly type them into your window, and I will try and get to as many of them as they can. Before I do, Shirzad, if you can just go forward one more slide. I just wanted to let people know that we have pretty amazing event coming up September 18th to the 21st in San Francisco called Dreamforce. If you're not familiar with it, it is now the largest enterprise conference in the country. They're expecting more than 50,000 people this year, including CEOs from GE and Burberry, as well as Tony Robbins, Colin Powell, and others. And for the first time this year, Ripple will be participating, and we are going to be having a series of thought leadership sessions along the lines of the one that you have sat in today. We've got a special pricing code for you there, so if this is something that would be of interest, please take advantage of this. It's going to be an amazing event. The Red Hot Chili Peppers are playing as well. And Shirzad, of course, if you are in town, you are welcome.
Thank you, Nick.
Now, let me go to the first question, which starts, "What a great presentation!" ! Thank you! So obviously, someone really enjoyed it. Could you please speak about how to deal with others who don't want to play with your tactics of the 5 sages, people who are chronically judgmental? How do you kind of overcome that type of judgmental behavior, Shirzad?
Well, one of the most important thing is that when somebody is coming from saboteur energy, it automatically triggers your own saboteurs if you're not careful. So, and that ends up then fueling their saboteurs. So typically, problematic relationships is a situation where one person's saboteur is triggering the other person, and then that triggers the first one even more. So the first most important thing you can do is, when that person with the saboteur is in front of you, make sure you begin to do some PQ reps so that you don't get hijacked by your own saboteurs, so that you basically break the cycle. So that's one of the most important things. The second thing is, if you really stay in your sage energy, because of the mirror neurons, it may not automatically and instantly shift the other person, but it will begin to slowly shift the other person. It will happen, so that's another way for you. You can begin to shift, to help shift them. The third is the saboteur assessment is one, and my book is one that actually shows every single human being has saboteurs. So it's potentially a way where you can tell somebody, hey, I'm discovering I have these saboteurs. I did this 5-minute assessment. I read this book. Are you interested or curious to find out what is yours? Or in a team, everybody in a team doing it. It gives people a way of not having to walk on eggshells and dealing with the fact that we all have things that are shooting us in the foot, and people admitting to things that they're doing that's not very effective. That's part of the reason I've created this framework.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. As someone who's read your book and worked through this, I think that the question is telling, because it sort of suggests that when you that the person is in that mindset to begin with. When you're kind of so focused on someone else's negativity, it means you're not really focused on yourself and what you can do, what power you have within your control to make changes, instead of expending so much energy worrying about the person that you're interacting with, and you really can't control to the extent that you can control your side of the interaction.
Yes, absolutely.
So another question, this was actually just, someone wanted you to spend another moment running through the PQ rep process again, if you'd be willing to do that.
Sure. So PQ rep, the science of this is that if you bring your attention to any of your five senses, let's say you begin to hear more exquisitely. So right now, as you're listening to me, begin to hear other sounds, the ambient sounds in the room you are in. Probably you haven't been hearing those other sounds. Now begin to hear them. Begin to hear fully. So you bring more attention to hearing. Or sense of touch. Right now, notice what your hand is touching. Just become aware of the sense of touch in your hand. Any of these sensations, if you are opening a faucet, really feel the temperature of that water. When you put a bite full of food in your mouth, can you really, really focus on the sensations of chewing that food, all of the flavor, all of the taste, rather than absent-mindedly eating? Each of these, if you do them for 10 seconds, they end up activating the brain regions that I call the PQ brain. And literally, within 21 days or so, if you keep doing this, about 100 PQ reps a day, new synaptic connections are made where information is going to travel down a new highway in your brain. So in the old days, one thing would automatically lead to you getting frustrated or upset, but that highway begins to wear out, and a new highway in your brain, synaptic connections are being made with the PQ practice. So all of a sudden, you one day will see the same situation that used to get you all upset happens, and you just notice it and chuckle and say, oh, wow, okay, that's interesting, just because it has become an automatic new brain habit. And it all happens with this very simple thing that I call PQ rep. And it's very easy, I show, because there's so many ways you can do it in every activity you have. It's very easy to get to the count of 100 every day.
That's great, Shirzad. We've got a couple more minutes. Someone is asking us sort of whether it makes sense when you're identifying threats to dip momentarily into survival mode. They ask, is this part of the brain better at identifying threats?
Oh, absolutely. And when there is a tiger, totally, let's run away from the tiger. The problem is that part of our brain was really developed for running away from tigers, but it's running us 24/7. Don't worry, when there is a real threat, actually, when you are in your PQ brain, your focus is much better on finding threats, because when you are in the PQ brain, you have a much fuller peripheral vision. Literally, your sense of vision is broader, and your focus is much more big picture, so that you do see threats better on the horizon, ironically, when you're in the PQ brain. And in that modality, when you see a true threat to your business, true threat to what it is you're doing, whatever, from the bigger picture scan, then from that place, you do command yourself to run. That's great. And then you activate the survival brain and you run. So ironically, you will find the true threats better in the PQ brain. When you're in survival brain, your focus is so narrow, mentally and physically, that you focus on too many things that aren't actual threats. So the real threats, you may even miss out on.
Okay, the last question for you, Shirzad, is just what do you generally find to be the biggest obstacle that people have when they're trying to reorient themselves to this way of thinking, this way of behavior? And what's kind of the one thing that people can take away from this that will help them overcome that?
Yeah, the main issue here is that you really have internal enemies. And any warrior will tell you that the biggest mistake of a warrior is to underestimate the power of your enemy. these enemies, these saboteurs, have convinced you all these years that they're your buddy, they're your friends. Right now, even, I often hear things in a seminar that says, gee, without the controller, I can't get anything done. If I don't have the judge, I will be taken advantage of. Without the stickler, quality will go to hell. Every one of these saboteurs are self-justifying their existence. So the main problem that I have seen in people following through with this stuff is that the saboteurs come back in and say, hey, buddy, actually, don't do this. You need me. Don't work too hard at getting rid of me. This is going to cost you. So that's the thing. Take the enemy inside seriously. They have been fed. They have been energized all these years. You've got to realize that they have quite an insidious power, and you've got to be vigilant about it. You've got to do a daily practice. One of the things I forgot to say is that people constantly are looking at the McDonald's version of transformation. They think that if only they read this right book or do this next workshop, they're going to be transformed for life. The metaphor is wrong, because the metaphor is more like physical fitness. If you go to a workshop over the weekend and you do a lot of physical fitness, you will not go back home and tell your spouse, hey, honey, I'm not physically fit for life. You'll tell your spouse you're inspired to remain fit, and you're going to do physical fitness every day. And the same thing, mental fitness. You've got to realize there actually is a muscle. There is a practice. There's daily practice you need to do, which I call the 100 PQ reps. Now, the saboteurs will tell you that's too much work. You're too busy to do it. And, oh, my God, you just don't have time for this. But one of the things I have done here is to just show you that actually right this moment you can do a PQ rep. When you're driving to work, you can do a rep. When you're taking a shower, you can do a rep. I'm taking the excuse away from the saboteurs trying to talk you out of this work. So I have taken all the excuses away. I've given you all the tools. And you got to just take the enemy seriously and know that they're going to try to talk you out of doing it in every way they can, and tell you there's just no way. This is too good to be true. This is too simple. This is this or that. And please don't buy those lies.
Well, thank you again for a really great and inspiring and thoughtful and very useful presentation today, Shirzad. We really appreciate it. And we will follow up by sending everybody a recording as well as the slides so that people can continue to review what you shared with them today. And thanks to everyone for joining, and we'll see you again at the next Leadership Webinar Series. Take care, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.